My name is Major General Eleanor Vance, United States Marine Corps. And on the day my father married his second wife, in front of 100 laughing, wine-soaked faces at the community hall in Willow Creek, Virginia, I heard him point at me and say, "She's nothing but a bastard, 50 for years. 50 for years of wearing this uniform, carrying 2 stars on my collar, enduring sandstorms, burying friends, making impossible decisions under fire." And those words, delivered with a smug satisfaction, didn't just roll off me. They landed, sharp, like shrapnel, and they stayed. I stood there, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee tasting like burnt grounds and styrofoam in my hand. The DJ was spinning some old country tune, the kind that makes you want to tap your foot or shed a tear. The air was thick with the scent of cheap wine and the boisterous chatter of an open bar. Then, my father, Harold, raised his glass for a toast. He didn't lift me up. He shoved me down. The room went quiet. Forks scraped to a halt against paper plates. My Aunt Martha gasped, a soft, horrified sound. Someone chuckled, thinking it might be a joke, a dark jest from a man known for his harsh humor. But it wasn't. He meant it. He leaned into the words, speaking them with the conviction of a man setting the record straight. He turned, puffed out his chest, and draped an arm around Ashley, the daughter of his new wife, Deborah. Ashley was 26, her hair sprayed high, her rose-pink dress a little too tight for the occasion, and a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. "This," my father announced, his voice booming with false pride, "this is my real daughter. This is the one who carries my name, right?" I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. That's never been my way. The Corps taught me discipline, forged it into my very bones, but I'd been practicing it long before I signed those enlistment papers back in a dusty little town called Harmony, Texas. I just set my coffee cup down and told the young bartender, a kid in a bow-tie vest, "Water's fine, thanks." I stepped outside into the parking lot. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, and cicadas buzzed from the ancient oak trees that lined the perimeter. I leaned against my car, a dull gray sedan that had seen more miles than most people flew in a lifetime, and breathed deep. The smell of cut grass mixed with the faint, acrid scent of cigarette smoke from a couple of old veterans lingering near the entrance. They looked at me, then looked away, unsure how to react. Folks never know what to do in moments like that. Inside, the laughter picked back up, a forced, uncomfortable sound. Someone cranked the music again, desperate to drown out the echoes of my father's cruelty. I could picture him dancing stiff-legged with Deborah, his new bride, oblivious to the emotional wreckage he'd left in his wake. I could picture Ashley soaking up the compliments, telling anyone who'd listen that she was a Marine too, stationed at Camp Maxwell. She wasn't lying. She just wasn't telling them the whole truth. That she worked in administration. That her name had already crossed my desk on a report about falsified travel receipts. But that wasn't for now. Not yet. Right then, all I could hear were my father's words, echoing louder than the cicadas. "She's nothing but a bastard. I'm a woman who buried friends in Arlington. I'm a woman who stood watch through sandstorms that scoured the paint off vehicles. I'm a woman who wrote letters to mothers, meticulously choosing each word when their sons didn't come home." And yet, in that hall, in front of neighbors and cousins and church ladies, my father had taken every ounce of dignity I had earned, every sacrifice, every star, and tried to reduce it to the circumstances of my birth. The thing about being humiliated isn't just the words. It's the way they hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. It's the way people's eyes avoid yours, the way they decide whether to clap or to stay quiet. That silence, the uncomfortable, complicit silence, is heavier than any insult. I thought about leaving. I thought about getting on I-81 and driving back to my quiet home in Stafford, putting this night, this fresh wound, behind me. I thought about the uniform bag still in the trunk from the ceremony I'd attended earlier that morning at Camp Maxwell. The crisp blue dress, the polished shoes, the ribbons, the 2 silver stars I'd earned the slow way, year after arduous year. I never once bragged about them. They were simply a part of me, earned through sweat and grit and unwavering resolve. And I thought about my mother, Margaret, long gone now, who used to tell me, "Eleanor, you don't have to fight every fight, but the fights you do pick, fight them clean." So I stayed in that parking lot longer than I should have, letting the cicadas fill the silence my father had left in me. And I decided that when I walked back in, I wasn't going to fight dirty. I wasn't going to raise my voice or swing at the man who gave me half my blood. I was going to stand as who I was, nothing more and nothing less. But that moment, the sting of those words, that suffocating silence in the community hall, that's where my story truly begins. I didn't sleep much that night. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale smoke, the kind you can't cover with any amount of air freshener. I lay there on the stiff mattress, still in my civilian clothes, staring at the popcorn ceiling and listening to trucks rumble down the highway. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. My father's voice, clear as a bell. She's nothing but a bastard. You'd think a woman my age, a general in the Marines, would be tougher, impervious to such cruel words. And in most ways, I am. I've faced down commanders who thought I didn't belong. I've had young Marines die under my watch and had to make those gut-wrenching calls to their parents. I've stood in desert heat that warped the horizon and made rifles too hot to touch. But it's the small-town words from your own blood, the ones that strike at the very core of your identity, that can cut deeper than any battle. Lying there, I thought back to where it all began. Harmony, Texas, 1,970 seconds. A duplex that rattled in the wind. A swamp cooler that barely kept the kitchen livable in July. My mom, Margaret, worked double shifts at a diner off Main Street. She'd come home smelling of fry grease and coffee, her hair pinned up, her tired shoes kicked off at the door. She was small, but she had a backbone stronger than any man I've met. My father wasn't much around. He had his HVAC business, or at least the beginnings of one, but he was never steady. Sometimes he'd show up in a beat-up Ford pickup. Sometimes he'd disappear for weeks. When he did come, he had a knack for turning a good day bad with a word or two. He never once showed up for a school play or a ball game. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to earn it myself. Paper routes before dawn, folding newspapers with frozen fingers. Summers, I mowed lawns, raked leaves, did whatever folks would pay a kid $2 an hour for. My friends saved up for cassette tapes and BMX bikes. I saved for a bus ticket out to school. I kept my head down. I wasn't the smartest, but I was steady. Teachers noticed. One of them, Mrs. Jenkins, wrote on a report card, "Eleanor follows through." I didn't think much of it then, but later, those words echoed with profound meaning. Mom did her best to shield me from my father's worst moods, but you can't hide everything. He had a way of talking down to her like she was furniture instead of flesh and blood. I remember one night, I was about 13. He looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You'll never be more than your mama." He thought it was an insult. I took it as a compliment. The summer after high school, I watched friends pack for state university or get married too young. I had no ring, no scholarship, and no patience left. One afternoon, I walked into the recruiter's office on Liberty Avenue. The Marine sergeant behind the desk looked at me over his neatly trimmed mustache and said, "You sure about this, miss?" I was. I signed the papers. Mom cried that night, not because she didn't want me to go, but because she knew I needed to. She told me, "Eleanor, you want out, earn it." So that August, I boarded a bus headed east. My suitcase was small. I had a pocket Bible from Mom and $50 in cash. Everything else I left behind. I stared out the window as the Texas plains rolled by, and I promised myself I'd never let anyone decide my worth again. Those first weeks at Paris Island were the hardest thing I'd ever done. Sand fleas, heat that soaked through your bones, drill instructors in your face until you shook from head to toe. But I didn't quit. Every time my legs wanted to give out, I thought about my father's words. Every time I doubted myself, I remembered my mom working nights, never once complaining. I didn't rise fast, but I rose steady. I cleaned rifles until my fingers bled. I learned to navigate by stars when the compass failed. I listened. I followed orders. And slowly, I learned to give them. Now, lying on that motel bed decades later, the air conditioner clattering in the window, I thought of all those nights Mom had stayed up sewing uniforms, counting tips, telling me I was worth more than my beginnings. I thought of the friends I'd buried, the medals tucked in a box at home, the crushing weight of command I carried. And still, one sentence from a 78-year-old man in a cheap rented suit had managed to drag me back to 13, sitting at a dinner table. In Harmony, Texas, I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and whispered to myself, "You've earned every inch of your life, Eleanor. Don't let him take that." The trucks kept rolling down the highway, and I sat in the dim light, remembering the plain facts of a hard childhood that forged me. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just remembered. The years blurred together after Paris Island, but the rhythm of the course never left me. Early mornings, boots laced, uniform pressed, coffee black. That steadiness carried me farther than talent or charm ever could. I spent my 20 seconds at Camp Lejeune, cutting my teeth as a logistics officer. While friends back home were working in oil fields or selling cars, I was learning how to move battalions across oceans with nothing but clipboards, radios, and sheer stubbornness. Nights were long, days longer. I bunked in cinder block barracks that smelled like sweat and pine sol, shared showers with rusted drains, ate chow that tasted like cardboard. But I was in. I belonged to something bigger than myself. I wasn't the kind of Marine who turned heads. I didn't have a loud laugh or a big swagger. I built a reputation for showing up, for keeping my word, for getting the job done. Promotions came slow, but they came. First lieutenant, captain, major, each step marked not by ceremony, but by the quiet acknowledgement of Marines who said, "Ma'am, you're solid." I remember Okinawa. The humidity clung to your skin like a second shirt. We ran drills until midnight, sweat dripping, mosquitoes buzzing. I kept a fan on my desk that rattled but never cooled the room. I wrote letters home for young Marines who didn't know how to tell their parents they were lonely. I sat on cots and listened when they cried. None of that made it into evaluations, but it mattered more than any score. By my 30 seconds, I was at Camp Maxwell, training officer candidates. I wore through 3 pairs of boots pacing those fields. My voice grew hoarse, barking orders. But I learned the faces of young Americans who carried every accent, every state, every story. Some quit, some rose. I learned that leadership wasn't about yelling. It was about listening, setting a standard and standing steady when storms hit. The years overseas left their mark. Desert tours where the heat warped the air until rifles burned your palms. Nights in tents where the wind howled and sand got into your teeth. I signed condolence letters by flashlight, each one a weight heavier than the last. I stood by flag-draped coffins, saluted until my arm ached, and swore I would never let their names fade. And still, the promotions kept coming. Colonel, Brigadier General, eventually, Major General. The kind of rank that isn't supposed to happen for women. Not in the Marines, not often. But I wasn't chasing stars. I was just doing what I had always done, showing up, following through. I don't brag about medals. Most of mine sit in a box in the closet, ribbons faded, edges bent. The real rewards came in the voices of the men and women I served with, like Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, grizzled and blunt, who once told me, "Ma'am, the kids watch what you do, not what you say," or Lieutenant Kim, fresh out of school, who whispered before deployment, "General, I'll be okay if you're okay." What people don't see is the grind, the paperwork that stacks higher than rifles, the meetings that stretch late into the night, the constant reminder that lives depend on your judgment and mistakes don't get erased. The weight of command is steady, relentless, and lonely. Still, I carried it because it was mine. I earned it, and no one, not a drill instructor, not an enemy, not a politician, and certainly not my father, gave it to me. That's the truth I held close as I looked back on 2 decades of hard miles. From the swamps of Lejeune to the dust of Afghanistan, from Okinawa's sticky nights to Maxwell's crisp mornings, I built a career brick by brick, with no shortcuts. And yet, standing in that community hall, hearing my father's voice cut me down to nothing more than my birth, it felt for a moment like all of it could be erased. That's the power of family. They know where the cracks are, and they know how to press them. But I also knew something else. The cracks don't define you. The mortar does. The work, the years, the showing up. That's what holds a life together. And mine was solid, whether my father saw it or not. The invitation had come months earlier, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope, with my name spelled wrong, Eleanor Vance. I laughed when I opened it. That was my father, Harold, all over, never bothered to learn the small things. Still, Aunt Martha called a week later and said, "Honey, it would be decent if you came, even if it's just to show your face." I didn't plan on going. 50 for years had taught me that some roads weren't worth walking. But Martha had been the one person who never turned her back on me. She was the aunt who slipped me lunch money in high school, who drove me to the bus station when I left for Paris Island, who called every Christmas no matter where I was stationed. If she asked, I'd show up. The morning of the wedding, I was at Camp Maxwell, overseeing a promotion ceremony. Blue dress uniform, shoes polished so bright you could see a reflection, 2 silver stars gleaming on the collar. Families clapped. Cameras flashed. A young Marine's mom hugged me so tight I could smell the starch in her blouse. When the ceremony ended, I walked back to my office, unpinned the stars, and hung the uniform in a garment bag. For a moment, I thought about leaving it there, but something told me to put it in the trunk of my sedan. The drive to Willow Creek was nothing new, just the endless crawl of I-81, brake lights blinking, billboards for diners and car dealerships. I stopped for gas, grabbed a black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, and kept going. By the time I pulled into the community hall lot, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and purple. Pickup trucks, minivans, and a stretch limo Deborah must have rented it were already parked outside. I didn't wear my uniform inside. Instead, I slipped on a plain navy dress and a pair of flats. Nothing fancy. I didn't want eyes on me. This was my father's day, not mine. Let him have it. Inside, the hall smelled of barbecue and cheap perfume. Plastic tablecloths stretched across. Rows of folding tables. A DJ set up in the corner, testing speakers with a classic country track. Cousins I hadn't seen in 30 years whispered behind napkins. Some waved, some didn't. I nodded, kept moving. Deborah was radiant in a rhinestone gown that looked straight out of a department store window. She hugged me stiffly, all teeth and perfume. "Eleanor," she said, voice high, "so glad you made it." Her daughter, Ashley, stood beside her, cheeks pink from too much blush, a glass of wine already in her hand. I didn't stay long at the table. I got myself a coffee in a styrofoam cup, stirred it though there was nothing to stir, and sat in the back near the exit. That's when the toasts began. My father stood in front of everyone, his hair slicked back, his suit baggy at the shoulders. He raised a glass of champagne, and the room hushed. "Family," he began, "is what gives a man pride." My chest tightened. For 1 second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd say something kind. But then he pointed straight at me. "She's nothing but a bastard." The room froze. Forks stopped scraping. Aunt Martha gasped. "Harold, don't do this." He pressed on, his voice swelling with self-righteousness. "This here?" He pulled Ashley close. "This is my real daughter, the one who carries my name, right?" Ashley blushed and giggled like she'd been crowned prom queen. Deborah clapped her hands together, proud as a peacock. "And me?" I just set down my coffee, told the bartender, "Water's fine, thanks," and walked outside. The parking lot was still hot from the day, cicadas buzzing from the trees. I leaned against my sedan, staring at the garment bag in the trunk. That blue dress uniform, heavy with medals and stars, hung silent inside. I'd brought it by habit, not intention. But now I wondered if maybe fate had other plans. I stayed out there longer than I meant to, listening to laughter drift through the open doors. Folks inside had decided how to handle my father's words. Some clapped, some looked away, most stayed quiet. Silence can weigh more than insult. Mom used to say, "Eleanor, you don't have to fight every fight, but the ones you pick, fight them clean." I repeated that to myself, watching fireflies flicker over the grass. Clean, not loud, not ugly, clean. And in that parking lot I realized I hadn't come to that wedding just for Aunt Martha. Deep down, I'd come because part of me still hoped my father would finally see me. He didn't, but maybe it was time for everyone else to. I slipped back inside after a while, trying to melt into the wallpaper. The DJ had switched to a lively tune, and couples were two-stepping on the linoleum floor. The air smelled like pulled pork, coleslaw, and sweet tea sweating in plastic cups. Nobody looked twice at me. Most folks were caught up in the celebration. That's when I heard Deborah's voice rise above the music. She was standing with a circle of cousins, laughing loud, her hand resting on Ashley's arm. "This is my daughter, Ashley," she said proudly. "She's in the Marines, stationed at Camp Maxwell." No less. The cousins oohed and aahed, eyes widening. Ashley leaned into it, her wine glass dangling between painted nails. "It's true," she said with a grin. "Maxwell is basically headquarters. I handle important stuff. Everyone there knows me." I stayed quiet, sipping water. My uniform life had taught me when to speak and when to keep still. But the truth tickled at the back of my throat. I knew Ashley's name. It had crossed my desk just last week. She was a lance corporal in administration, flagged for falsified travel receipts. Nothing. Career ending if she owned up and corrected it, but serious enough that she'd need guidance. I didn't bring it up. Not at her mother's wedding. Not with everyone's eyes watching. But the contrast gnawed at me, my father holding her up as the shining star. While I was nothing but a bastard in his eyes, I walked closer, close enough to hear the details. Deborah boasted, "She'll go far." Not everyone gets posted to Maxwell. Shows you the kind of talent she has. One of the cousins, old Hank from Charlottesville, clapped Ashley on the back. "Well, good on you, girl. Carry the family name proud." Ashley grinned, chin high, soaking up every drop of attention. "Oh, I will. You'll see me in stripes before long. Maybe even officer school." The room buzzed with approval. Meanwhile, I stood there, a general with 2 stars, unnoticed in my plain navy dress. Aunt Martha shuffled over, whispering, "Eleanor, don't mind them. Folks don't know the half." Her eyes, soft and sad, searched mine. I just smiled thinly. "It's all right, Martha." But inside, something cracked. I wasn't jealous of Ashley's pride. She was young, hungry, maybe reckless, but she was still a Marine. What hurt was my father's smugness, the way he used her as a prop to erase me. Later, at the buffet table, I found myself next to Ashley. She was piling fried chicken on her plate, talking a mile a minute to a friend. She turned, noticed me, and said, "Oh, hey, you're Eleanor, right? Dad's first kid." I nodded. "That's right." Her friend asked, "So, are you in the Marines too?" Ashley smirked before I could answer. "Nah, she just does her own thing." Then she winked at me like we shared some private joke. I sat down my plate untouched. "Something like that," I said quietly, and walked away. Back at my table, I stirred another cup of bad coffee, my hands steady, though my chest burned. I thought of that counseling memo on my desk, the one with Ashley's name at the top. I thought of how the Corps doesn't care about family pride or wedding speeches. It cares about truth, discipline, accountability. And I thought about how my father had called her his real daughter while dismissing me as less than nothing. I didn't blame Ashley. She was young, caught up in her mother's pride. But I knew sooner or later she'd learn what the Marine Corps demanded, and it wasn't glittering introductions at community halls. It was the kind of work that left you bone-tired, steady, and scarred. I didn't want revenge on her. I didn't even want revenge on my father. What I wanted was the truth to stand. And sometimes the only way for truth to stand is to put it in front of everyone, plain and simple. That night, as I drove back to the motel, headlights stretching down the highway, I kept replaying the scene in my head. Deborah boasting, my father beaming, Ashley soaking it all up. I kept seeing the garment bag in my trunk, the 2 stars gleaming on the collar. I'd chosen not to wear it. I'd chosen silence. But silence, I realized, had a cost. The parking lot was nearly empty by the time I stepped outside again. A couple of old veterans leaned against the hood of a pickup truck, smoking and swapping stories, their laughter drifting through the warm Virginia night. The air was thick with honeysuckle and the faint soreness of spilled beer. I walked past them, nodded, and made my way to my sedan. I leaned against the trunk, staring at the dark outline of trees beyond the lot. I could still hear the muffled thump of music inside the hall. My father's voice echoed in my head, louder than the bass line. "She's nothing but a bastard." I opened the trunk. The garment bag lay across the back, zipper glinting in the dim light. I hadn't planned to wear the uniform again that day, but now it felt like it was waiting on me, patient and heavy. I brushed my hand along the bag, and I swear I could feel the weight of every mile, every year, every grave I'd saluted. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over contacts. One name stared back at me, MG Ricardo Rodriguez Rhett. I'd served with Rodriguez 20 years ago in Okinawa, and though he was retired now, he had a way of reminding me what mattered. I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. "General," he said, voice gravelly but warm. "Didn't expect to hear from you this late." I sighed, leaned against the car. "Rick, I'm at my father's wedding." He stood up in front of everyone and called me a bastard. Then he introduced Ashley as his real daughter. Silence stretched for a beat. Then Rodriguez chuckled, dry as dust. "He's still the same old Harold, huh?" "Worse," I muttered. "What are you thinking, ma'am?" Rodriguez asked. I stared at the garment bag. "I've got my blue dress uniform in the trunk. 2 stars, ribbons, everything. Part of me wants to walk back in there wearing it. Part of me thinks that's petty." Rodriguez's voice steadied. You earned that uniform, ma'am. Every stitch of it. Wearing it isn't petty. It's the truth. Don't say much. Don't raise your voice. Just be who you are. That's more than enough. I closed my eyes, breathed in the humid night air. I don't want to humiliate anybody. Then don't, Rodriguez said simply. But don't let a lie stand either. Your old man can shout. Your stepmother can brag. But the uniform you earned, no one can take that away. Let them see it. Let them know. We sat in silence for a while, just the buzz of cicadas filling the gap. Finally, Rodriguez said, whatever you decide, ma'am. I know you'll do it clean. Clean, I echoed, remembering Mom's words. Thanks, Rick. After we hung up, I stood there a long time, listening to the night. A train horn blew somewhere far off, low and mournful. I unzipped the garment bag. The smell of wool and starch hit me like memory itself. Piece by piece, I put it on. Shirt, crisp, collar tight, medals pinned in precise rows, 2 silver stars gleaming at the shoulders. I slipped into the jacket, buttoned it slow, pulled on the polished shoes that reflected the parking lot lights. Last, I checked myself in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't just Eleanor from Harmony, daughter of Margaret, dismissed by Harold. She was Major General Eleanor Vance, United States Marine Corps. I squared my shoulders, straightened my cover, and whispered to myself, you didn't come here to win a scene. You came here to stand in the truth. With that, I shut the trunk and walked back toward the hall, every step firm, steady, clean. The hall was still buzzing when I pushed the door open. A blast of air conditioning hit me, along with the twang of a fiddle from the DJ's speakers. Folks were laughing, clinking cups, cutting cake. But when I stepped across the threshold, the sound didn't just quiet, it died. I walked in, my heels clicking against the linoleum, my blue dress uniform gleaming under the fluorescent lights. 2 silver stars caught every pair of eyes. You could have heard a pin drop. A cousin muttered, good Lord. Another whispered, that's 2 stars, isn't it? Chairs creaked as people turned to follow me with their eyes. My father froze near the head table. Deborah's arm looped through his. His smile faltered, then stiffened into something colder. Ashley was mid-laugh when she saw me. At first, her eyes caught the medals, the ribbons, the cut of the jacket. Then her gaze lifted, and she saw my face. The color drained from hers. She backed up a step, her hand trembling against her wine glass. Oh my God, she stammered, her voice cracking loud enough for the whole room to hear. She is my general. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked toward the front, every step measured. When I reached the head table, I turned to face the crowd. I came tonight to wish my father a good life, I said, my voice even, calm. I didn't come for speeches, and I didn't come for insults. I am who I am, and I worked for it. Nobody breathed. The DJ had cut the music, and even the ice machine seemed to stop humming. I turned slightly toward Ashley, who stood frozen, her cheeks still pale. Ashley will handle any marine business at the office. Not here. Her lips parted, but no words came. She nodded once, quick and jerky. Then I raised my glass of water to making things right when we can. I took a slow sip, set it down, and waited. It was Aunt Martha who broke the silence. Eleanor, honey, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. She started clapping. One by one, others joined, hesitant at first, then louder. Vietnam veterans at the back straightened in their chairs, saluted sharp and proud. A woman from church dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Even the bartender, the kid with the bow tie vest, stood taller behind the counter. My father didn't clap. He just stood there, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. Deborah forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. But it didn't matter. The truth was, standing plain in front of everyone, and there was no walking it back. I didn't linger. I wasn't there to gloat. I stepped away from the head table, walked through the room as the applause swelled, and headed for the door. Each handshake, each nod, each whispered, thank you, General, was more than enough. Outside, the cicadas were still buzzing, the night still heavy with summer air. I took a deep breath, let it out slow, and for the first time in a long time, I felt clean. The applause faded as I stepped into the night air. The music inside picked up again, someone trying to stitch the evening back together. I walked across the parking lot, the cicadas buzzing louder than the fiddle, and leaned against my sedan. My chest felt tight, but not from shame, from release. I didn't drive off right away. People started trickling out one by one, like they needed air after what they'd just witnessed. A Vietnam veteran in a ball cap approached, his gait stiff from old wounds. He stuck out his hand. "Proud of you, ma'am," he said, his voice rough but steady. "We needed someone like you back then." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, and thank you for your service." Another guest, a woman I vaguely remembered from church potlucks, pressed my hand between hers. "Your mama would be so proud, Eleanor." Her eyes brimmed with tears, and before I could answer, she turned back inside. Ashley came out next. She hesitated a long time, fidgeting with her clutch before walking toward me. Her voice was small, nothing like the brash tone she'd carried inside. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." I studied her face. She was just a kid, really. 26. Too much blush, wine still on her breath. "You don't have to know everything yet," I said evenly. "But you do need to be honest. We'll talk at Camp Maxwell. Bring your receipts. Bring the truth. You'll be fine if you're honest." She swallowed hard, nodded, and whispered, "Yes, ma'am." Then she hurried off into the night. My father never came out. Not right away. Deborah followed Ashley, lips tight, eyes flashing. She didn't speak to me, just walked past, her shoes clicking on the asphalt. The lot emptied until it was just me and the hum of the streetlights. I sat in the driver's seat, uniform still sharp, hands resting on the wheel. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from my father. I didn't listen until later. His voice was unsteady. "Eleanor, I went too far. Shouldn't have said it. I don't know how to fix it." He hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, back at Camp Maxwell, I sat behind my desk with a stack of files. Ashley's memo was there, waiting exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, read it line by line, and signed it by the book. No cruelty, no favoritism, just the truth. That's what the Corps demands. Word spread fast about the wedding. Marines talk, but I didn't feed the story. I showed up to work, same as always. Inspections, meetings, young officers fumbling through their first briefs. I kept the rhythm steady, because that's what leadership is. Consistency, not spectacle. That weekend, I drove out to the cemetery where Mom was buried. The grass was trimmed, neat flags fluttering between rows of stones. I stood there in the morning sun, hands clasped behind my back, and told her softly, "It's done, Mama." He said his piece, I said mine, and the truth stood on its own.